All right. So today, thank you, Peter MacKenzie and Ben Toner. I've got two of the Wi-Fi community's top analysis gurus with us today on Under the AP on today's podcast. I think anybody who may be listening today, obviously, if you are, you're familiar with Wi-Fi, you're in the community and you're familiar with Peter MacKenzie. Peter, you've been around for a very long time, and I mean, your name. When people talk about Peter, there's always some kind of discussion being had about analysis, right? Usually, it's packet capture analysis because that I think. I mean, you always teach those CWAP classes. You present in conferences about doing analysis, and so I think you are the Mr. Wi-Fi analysis when it comes to those packet capturing and just diving into those
Yeah,
details.
that's what I love to do,
Um,
Todd. Yeah.
and Ben, Ben here with us today. Ben has a product of his own or a company of his own called nOversight, which focuses on the log analysis for iPhones. Ben, is it also all Apple like does your software work on like Apple computers, or is it primarily for phones and tablets?
It started with phones and tablets. There's a beta out now which is working directly for MacBooks, and it is entirely possible for it to work on Android devices, and that's kind of in the plan.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, I'm not an Apple guy, so when you get something working with Android, I'll be happy to try that out for you. I'm eager to see what that looks like. And again, sorry guys, I don't know. There might be a little bit of delay. You guys are over in the UK. I don't know if that really matters or not, and what's causing our delay since this is all going over internet. But I do apologize if there's a bit of delay there. Hopefully that comes out. Once I get the recording up there, can deal with that delay. But Peter, I'd like to just start with you. Talk a bit about, give you a chance to talk about, you know, how you got into Wi-Fi or what your journey's been like in your Wi-Fi career, or if there's something else you'd rather talk about when it comes to just you and what you're doing. But to start, for those who maybe don't know you, give us a bit about yourself, what you're doing right now, why your interest is, why you're interested in Wi-Fi, and we can just kind of go from there.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks, Todd. Yeah. So I guess a bit of an introduction to me. I'm based in the UK. I've been working with Wi-Fi for 20 plus years now. And currently, what am I doing? Well, I'm working doing a little bit two roles actually in the UK. So I'm working for two companies which are like sister companies, I guess, in the UK. One called MacKenzie, which I've worked for many years, which we do a lot of wireless consultancy, training, installation and deployment work, as well as reselling a number of wireless vendors project work. And then we set up a sister company called MQ Training about 3 years ago, which has training's always been a big part of what I do. In the wireless industry, I really believe in training and educating people in what wireless design and wireless analysis. I think it's really important, and we can maybe talk a bit more about that later. But we decided to separate out the training work into a separate company for a couple of reasons. And one was that because I wanted to take it in a slightly different direction. I've always done a lot of vendor neutral training and a little bit of vendor training, both on the sort of infrastructure and tool side. But I really wanted to help set up a company to help vendors create educational content. Because it occurred to me that, and I'm sure we've all done it, and I'm not by all means putting all vendors together in the same boat, but I've set a lot of really bad vendor training classes in my time. And over a number of years, I've tried to think about, well, why is that, and how can we make it better? And that's really what I set up MQ Training to do, is to try and help vendors create good quality educational content.
So was that was the MQ training, did that come because you were getting approached to do more and more training, or is this just something that you decided, you know what, we need better training out there, let me start something up and then go sell it? Like how'd that start? How'd you get into
It's been
side of
something
things?
I've been passionate about for probably 5 years before I set the company up, but and wanting to create quality vendor-based training. The difficulty has always been, well, how do you sell that? Exactly what you say. How do you sell that to organisations? Because I can talk about. I don't blame vendors for the training that's out there now. I think I just don't think a vendor's the right person to write their own training and deliver it. That's my opinion. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. One, because I think the tendency is, if you work for a vendor, is you want to teach your product because you live and breathe your product every day. So they end up teaching button clicks, as in go here, go here. So how do you
Right.
enable 802.11air? Well, you go to this menu, you go here, you click here, and you do it, but not why or what 802.11air is. And why would you want to do it? When wouldn't you want to do it? That side of it often gets missed. And I think that's what was missing from a lot of training programs. And
Yeah, I totally agree with you there, because I've done
mm,
a fair amount of training, and when you're trained by somebody who works for the company of the product that you're being trained on, sometimes it can kind of feel like a more like a sales pitch,
and
right? And they might be a bit blind to um, some of the reactions, I guess, that we might get if we're not tied to that company. And so I like what you're saying with for a trainer to not actually be, you know, part of the company, right? Because then you can kind of have like an independent view of the product, of the tool, whatever it might be that you're training them on, and talk about what it does really well, um, and what can still need some work, and how we can
absolutely
get around that, because part of trading is using the product, and products, as we all know, don't always work,
no. And,
um,
and
the-
yeah,
perfectly,
and I
right?
think part of that is, I also think, some people might think I'm sound like I'm beating up vendors. I'm really not. They're my customers. But I think if you work for a vendor, I think it's right that you have a sales focus, because vendors are sales organizations. They're there to sell a product, and you should sort of live and breathe that product, and believe in it, and think it's the best product out there, and be very sales focused. So I think that's good for people who work for vendors. But then if you're doing not sales training, you're doing technical training, I think it's then very hard, if that's your mindset, to then come and give some good technical training, even on your own product. And that's why I just think bringing external people in can provide that. Um, so I've had that belief for many years, but actually, and wanted to do it, but I was always like, well, how do you go and talk to a vendor and say, let me write your course for you? And even if you convince them, they then go, well, how much? And then it's like, well, why can't we just get our internal people to do it? And you sort of cycle a bit round. So the key thing for me was getting the first customer, I think, really, um, which and convincing someone of my vision, really, which I did with Juniper. They were the first people who I wrote a course for, and I'm thankful for them for helping me kickstart its vision. And again, other people now and other customers have seen the benefit of that, and it becomes a bit of an easier sell, having done it once. So that's
Yeah, I took that missed training
mm,
that you did. You actually taught the class also that I was a part of. You probably don't remember, but I signed up accidentally for the Europe time
oh
slot for
yeah.
that training. and I'm in Utah here in the U.S. Mountain time, and so I had to get up and
That's a
you
tough
know
a
I
tough
was
gig.
taking that training over the nighttime hours, yeah,
Yeah.
because I wasn't very thorough during the scheduling
So
process.
yeah. So that's what I'm
Well,
doing really.
very cool, very cool. So, well, I was going to ask you then, how much? I mean, if how much of your day then are you spending training versus actually doing, going out and sniffing packets and doing analysis and solving
That's a
problems?
great question. It's I'm a big believer. Something when I first was taught to train, I was taught by some amazing people in a company called Wild Packets back in the day. They're now being brought by Live Action, who make protocol analyzers. They taught me to teach their classes, and the people there who was training me, two amazing instructors, but they were very adamant, and this has lived with me ever since. If you're a trainer, you should only train no more than 50% of your time. You need to be doing the job you're training people on the other 50%. So if you're training people on wireless, you should be working in the wireless industry the other 50% of the time, because otherwise you lose. It becomes academic, and you lose that connection. So I've always tried to live by that sort of rule, no more than 50% training. And different years it's going to vary a little bit. Sometimes I might fail and do 60% training, but I've always sometimes I'm only going to train maybe 30% of the time. But I've tried to keep it around the 50% as my cutoff, of not doing any more than 50%. Um, so that's a
That
key
seems
thing to
smart.
me.
Yeah.
Um, uh, with the new company, obviously, I'm doing a lot of coursework development as well. So I'm actually probably doing less training and having other people do the training at the moment, because again, I'm seeing the sort of development and the training as not really wanting to take up more than about 50% of my time, so I can still do the consultancy and get the field experience.
Well, yeah. When it comes to the field experience, right? Like, what if when you're called to go out and you know, do the PCAP
Mm.
analysis, gather data and look through it all. What are the typical types of problems that you would say you're sent out to fix? Maybe like in the last year or two.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I would two things I would probably say there. Is some of the detailed PCAP analysis I end up having to do. There isn't really a typical problem, because people will often phone me up when they've had a problem for a while that they've been trying to fix, and they can't fix it, and now they want to pay someone to come in. And sometimes that can be quite complex. So I'll often, it might be a problem that's been there for 6 months, and the nature of the problem, looking at the config, looking at the logs, opening support cases with the vendor, hasn't been able to fix it, and that's why they're sort of bringing me in. So those type of problems tend to be very varied, but then we also, as a company markets, we get called in just when wireless networks are performing very well, and I would say over. I would say there's a few typical things that you look for, um, which I think on a badly performing network can fix most networks. And I would put them as one of them is SSID management. So having probably the top thing I've done over networks I've looked at over the last year is convincing people to separate 2.4 and 5 gig SSIDs. So not having one SSID across both bands. Um, it seems to have been especially important since COVID, and people have gone back to work, and they're all doing Teams, video meetings, Zoom meetings, and if they have a per performance on 2.4 just with 3 channels, we can't have 80 people all on a Zoom meeting. So, but it's intermittent. If they've happened to have landed on a 5 gig channel, they get a good performance. Another day they've connected at 2.4. So separating 2.4 and 5 gig onto separate SSIDs has been a massive improvement. I've had customers say they've literally 60% of their support calls have reduced since just making their corporate network 5 gig only. So 5 gig only sort of corporate, huge.
So their devices, for whatever reason, are just going over to they're connecting on 2.4, and because of that, they're having all these issues,
Yeah,
and
if you have the
that
same SSID
that's
on both bands, there's no way of controlling the clients really. So sometimes they'll connect on 2.4, and those
right,
times they connect on 2.4 to get per performance, and then other times they'll be on 5 gig. So it's a really intimate, and of course the report is, oh, the Wi-Fi was bad today, and you go to that location, it's great because you happen to test on 5 gig, and no one knows. Was just
right.
making corporate access 5 gig only fixes all those unusual problems. So I'd say that would be number one in my top three. Number two would be disabling lower data race. Just getting rid of B data race. Normally I go for 12 or 24 megabits minimum data rate, especially where you've got a lot of co-channel interference and lots of dense AP deployments. Getting rid of those lower data rates free up so much airtime, not having your beacons and your management frames going at lower data rates. So that's a massive one. And the other one, believe it or not, is transmit power, minimum transmit power. So often I find it's at like such a low setting, and the APs are reducing the cell size down, that you end up getting clients connecting at low data rates because the power's so low. So setting a sensible, normally increasing the minimum transmit power. And I would say those three things alone fix 80% or
So
90% of
are you
poorly performing
saying
networks.
then? Yes. So two of the top three you just mentioned of the issues that you're encountering, um, are channels and power levels.
Yeah, power levels.
So are you saying that the vendor's auto RF functionality isn't working typically?
I actually think it's much better than it ever used to be, but it needs tuning. So a left at default is what I would question.
Yes.
I think I have a rule for minimum transmit power, and that is whatever you've designed your network to be. So whether you use Akahau, Hamana, whatever software you use to design it, is when you place an AP on a map, you put it, it's got a power level associated with it. And you design primary and secondary coverage, and you have all your heat maps. And so you've got primary coverage, you've got secondary coverage. If you then allow your vendor to put your power lower than that, you're going to introduce what? Secondary coverage cells, maybe. Or why do the design? So
Yeah.
my big thing is whatever your power level is in your design, make that your minimum transmit power. Allow the vendor to go higher and adapt to our and to me that's one of the key things, that whatever you've designed to, if that's your minimum transmit power, then you know it's not going to go less than your design. Otherwise, why bother with that design? Because what
Yeah,
have you achieved
exactly.
doing a design? You
Exactly.
spend all that time painting a map green or whatever you've been doing, making sure that you've got the right coverage, and then you go, well, it's all to the leave the vendor can just change it. So
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of my regular battles is getting people off of from using like the default settings, right? Especially around their auto RF functionality, whichever vendor, you have, like you said, exactly, you have to tune it, right? You have to go in there and tune those features for that, or those settings for that feature to
but I've
work well. Otherwise, if you just leave it completely wide open and let the system change, then usually what I see is that, for one, it changes all the time. It changes way too often, that more than it should. It's always adjusting because design might not be optimal. And two, the end result is you have, I think, like you described earlier, you might have one AP that's really loud and the AP right next to it, because the neighboring AP is loud, it's got a very low power, transmit power taking place. And so you just have these uneven,
so
coverage
I think
cells
two
around.
things that across the old vendors that you should always configure: minimum transmit power and the frequency, which you've mentioned, of how often it changes. So when it can make changes. Now some vendors have good defaults for how often they change. Some don't, so it does depend vendor to vendor. But minimum transmit power, to me, that is even if you don't configure anything else, configure that is what I would say.
Yeah. Well, how often, when you're doing analysis, right? How often is the issue that you end up discovering through your analysis? How often is that issue more of like a firmware issue versus a configuration
Yeah,
issue?
I think that would come down to, I guess, going into this category of the more complex issues where people have had a problem, they've had lots of people involved, and then they get me up, and I'm doing some really detailed analysis. It very often when it gets to that level, it is often it's often ends up getting fixed by firmware. I want to be a bit careful by saying firmware bug because sometimes it is just a bug with the firmware of the AP. Sometimes though it can be more an incompatibility between a particular client and a particular AP. Um, and it's hard to point a finger at either one because you might be looking at, for example, power save. Most vendors do power save in a proprietary way. They don't follow the standard, they flip the power management bit on and off. I once saw an issue where the way that the client was implementing it and the way the AP thought it should be implemented were different. But we're talking about doing something in a proprietary way, so you can't say either one was right or wrong, but they just weren't in sync with how they thought it should work. So
Sure.
that
Yeah.
ended up being a firmware. The AP vendor in the end that did something, and we had to tweak some settings on the client. But it's not always about blame. It's sometimes just about there's an incompatibility here, and someone needs to fix it.
Yeah. 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 It's just that discovery process, right? Once you find what the issue is, it's pretty satisfying. Like you've identified this is what's happening, and then at that point, you can go to the vendor, the AP vendor or the client device vendor, and say, look, it appears like your device isn't doing this the way it should for it to work well. Um, and it's always great to have that PCAP, right? You have
Absolutely.
that PCAP that you can then say, here you go, look at this. This is why I'm saying what I'm saying. Get their buy-in, and then you can move on trying to get things resolved. The last several issues I had to go out and do packet capturing for, it actually were firmware related issues, bugs or whatever you would want to call them. But the fix ended up being in the AP firmware to resolve that issue. So that's why I asked that, because I'm seeing that, it seems like, more
I
often
think it seems to be almost becoming more
these days.
common as well. That as Wi-Fi's just got more and more complicated with newer physical layers coming out,
Yeah,
it's no doubt is going to be it's more difficult to implement. So you're going to get more and more of these bugs that need discovering. And you're right; it's very satisfying when you find it. You can get a lot of job satisfaction out of doing protocol analysis.
yeah.
It's very
I would say that's
good.
yeah, that's become my favorite part of my job anymore. I don't do it as often as I would like, but when I do get those opportunities to go out and capture packets and then do my analysis and then marry it with the logs from the infrastructure side or from the client side, it's a lot of fun. It's fun just
It's good fun.
looking at all the data and doing
If you're
that
doing it
discovery.
from customers, though, don't necessarily expect. I always say it's a lot of fun and satisfying. Don't expect to get many thanks much, because very often, especially if it's a config issue, you're basically telling someone they've done their job incorrectly, and that's why this network's not been working. So it can sometimes be quite interesting that you don't actually get the thanks so much for
Yeah.
pointing out my errors.
I mean, as long as you can show them that it works now, if they follow your recommendations, then what more can you do,
Exactly.
right? Well, that's great. Well, thanks, Peter, for kind of sharing with us a bit about what you're working on now. A lot of this training. Um, I think what you're doing, your approach to training is spot on, and that's probably why you're getting more and more opportunities to create training material. I listened recently to your interview when you were on Heavy Wireless with Keith
Yes.
Parsons. You mentioned that you're going to be doing training for, or you're creating training for Hamina,
Yes.
the new Wi-Fi design tool that a lot of us are excited about and eager to learn
Yeah.
more
It's a
about.
great tool.
So that'll be interesting to see what you
Great
come up
tool.
with
We've
for that.
just actually this week, last week launched the 1 day product training for that. So that's people can book places on that class now. And we're going to be coming out with a full
Nice.
4 day class a little bit later on. The 1 day class is aimed at people who already know how to design Wi-Fi, but just want to transfer their skills over to Hamina. So it's very product focused. But then we'll be coming out with a full 4 day class for people who want to learn how to design Wi-Fi using the Hamina tools.
Yeah, very cool. All right, look forward to
Yeah.
that then. Well, again, thanks for sharing all of that with us. Right now, I want to jump over to Ben. Ben, you've been patiently waiting there as we've been talking about, you know, Peter's, kind of journey through Wi-Fi as of late. Um, I mentioned, in the intro a bit about, you and your company or product, or maybe it's a combination of the two, called nOversight. We can get to that a little bit, but first, tell us, how you ended up getting into Wi-Fi, and maybe a thing or two about your journey along the way over the years, and then finally a bit about, what you're doing these days.
Hey Todd, great. Thank you very much for the intro, and it's really a pleasure to be on this podcast with you. So my journey into Wi-Fi came really through a kind of a generic radio engineering interest, and I pretty much straight out of university joined a company which was owned by Siemens, who were in the telecom industry, and I really got lucky, and I got to do a whole raft of different things within the telecoms industry, which allowed me to really figure out where I really wanted to be. So right in my earliest sort of 5 years of my career, I was able to get involved in building 2G and 3G base stations, which Siemens were designing at the time. And I worked on handsets, and the thing that sort of the beginning of the sort of the launching point was I built a transmitter which was an OFDM transmitter, which is basically the modulation behind digital TV and digital audio. And I was building an audio broadcast, and I was getting into OFDM, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is an amazing technology. This is something really good, and it wasn't used in cellular at the time. There was actually a company in Germany called Flarion who was starting to use it. Flarion Flash was like a contender for 3G. And it was one of those, and I was like, I really hope this comes good. But 3G became what it did based on CDMA, and then we had to wait to 4G before we started CFDM. But I used to train people in the military and other organizations in OFDM, and that's before OFDMA was around. And I remember getting some internal private venture money from within this big company, and kind of starting to do some MATLAB simulations around how could multiple users use the same piece of spectrum using OFDM, because actually you're dealing in individual discrete tones. It's like, it must be possible to get multiple people doing this. So I already started knocking on the door of OFDMA. And so that was back in 2005 when I was doing that. So I knew that was the way. Then I kind of went on a bit of a journey. I lived in Canada for a while, and I worked for a startup actually in the finance industry, and I got into NFC and all those other technologies. And I knew I really wanted to sort of do more entrepreneurial work, and actually rejoined this company in the UK, I should say. It was called Roke Manor Research. And when I rejoined it, I'd rejoined in more the business development side, trying to help this company with this kind of kit bag full of technology pieces develop some products. And it actually was instrumental in employing outside help. And one of the figures that came along, who you'll know quite well, was Dean Bubley, who helped me look through our kit bag and said, you know what, Wi-Fi is becoming pretty big, and actually, selecting Wi-Fi, when to use Wi-Fi, when to use mobile, is actually a big issue. We're now talking sort of 2007, and so I got into what was crudely called always best connected, but became what's today called convergence, really, where you're kind of talking about wireless connectivity is just a way of connecting. And from a user's point of view, we've slowly been transitioning to, I don't really care what I'm connected to. In the days when data plans were expensive on cellular, Wi-Fi was really kind of like one of the things people would be looking at. But Wi-Fi was also charged a lot in those days. You had to buy vouchers, you had to pay for it. So anyway, my Wi-Fi career started there, and I got into doing a ton of Wi-Fi projects with mobile carriers. So I worked with Comcast, with T-Mobile USA, with Vodafone Germany, and I started creating with a team. I was kind of more on the business development side, creating mobile side products, which then integrated with Cisco's back-end products that they were selling to mobile operators to kind of help configure Wi-Fi from the back end. So it was just put your SIM card in and off you go. And actually you can use the carrier's Wi-Fi infrastructure too. Comcast have got Xfinity. What a great, estate they have, and how do you get that used and so on. So that journey went on for quite some time. That was a big kind of, it's like what I would call an entrepreneurship. It was a big startup type of blast. Got sold out to another company that lasted a couple of years, and then really everybody in this space started just popping one by one because it wasn't really turning out the way everybody anticipated, and so that game ended. And in 2019, I decided to go solo, and I was like, okay, I know I want to go solo because I just feel like I've got a ton of ideas. I just want to push them through, and I was thinking about what to do. And I was like, okay, I'm going to need to be a consultant, just because I've got a ton of it. I've got a ton of this kind of real world hands-on knowledge, but and that'll help me get started. But I really, really, really want to make a product of my own. And when we were doing all this work with the mobile carriers, one of the biggest things that was really difficult was kind of saying, what is this iPhone doing on the network? How is it choosing its cellular connections? How is it choosing its Wi-Fi connections? And it was really, really hard to figure it out because there's no information. And at that time, it was sort of scratching on the surface of, well, there's these logs and there's stuff in there that's kind of telling you what's going on. And there's a lot of resistance from the industry saying, well, you should be doing this in the back end. You should be doing this at the controller. You should be doing this. And I'm like, well, you could do, but there was a lot of aggregated networks. There's iPass and all those people who was like bringing networks together from all sorts of places and all sorts of vendors. Well, there isn't one touch point. The only sensible singular touch point is the client. So that was the beginning. And when I was researching, how to sort of look into client analysis and so on, I actually came across Peter MacKenzie and a blog post you'd written, Peter. I remember it now. It was a black page with a picture of your magician's top hat, and you'd done a Windows kind of knock-up demo client in terms of picking out a few key parameters. And so the very first thing I did was
that's right.
I mocked that up, but for iOS, and thought, well, if there's this guy called Peter, and he's getting really excited about doing it on Windows, and nobody can do anything for Apple. If I can do that same thing over here, that might be quite good. And lo, I was able to do it, and that was the beginning. That was the jumping off point there. That's about 2020 that happened.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I think the big missing piece I feel like I encounter when I'm doing any kind of debugging, troubleshooting, is understanding what the client is doing, right? I can see on the infrastructure, on the APs, I've got logs. I can look through event logs. I can see what's going on. I can do a PCAP, right, and kind of get that information, that detail. But a big missing piece is really like that client side information. And that really kind of dawned on me. I used to work at a company called Theatro. Um, they have these client devices, these like mobile wearable um, computers that are used for like communication and other things. Um, and they connect to the Wi-Fi, and they're in retail, and so users are walking around all over the place. And when issues happen, because I worked for that vendor, I had that client level detail, right, of what it was doing at the time the issue occurred. And so I'm like, oh, this is great. I've got all this detail. I know exactly what's happening here to fix the issue. But when you've got, like you said, right, if you've got an Apple device, an iPhone or an Android phone or tablets or whatever, it's so hard to that client level detail, right? That I think really is so helpful when you're doing that kind of debugging. So how did like the logs that you're getting from um, an iPhone, for example, right? Are these logs? I'm guessing they were never designed to be retrieved by any kind of user. Is this just stuff that they put in there for their own, and like internal teams that you found where it is, and you're kind of bringing that to light, so to speak? Like what was the purpose of those logs, and how did you actually get access to those logs through your nOversight project?
Yes, so the logs are there as a debug mechanism. Um, when you build an app, you can use the logging framework and write your own logs. And there's a lot of system information in there. I think most people know now, you can sort of get a diagnostic profile for an Apple device. You can put it on your Apple device, and for a short period of time, that is valid and lets you save a diagnostic, and that can be then uploaded. And so there's often Apple support cases where they say, put this profile on, send us a diagnostic, and it's taking from this logging infrastructure. But the logs themselves are just coming out effectively over a virtual interface through the USB port, and some of them are private, some of them, the information is redacted and so on, but a lot of them are not. And on my journeys, I've discovered that, there's a lot of people out there who use these, Apple engineers as well, right? And there's a lot of people who've had a little go at writing a Python script or something to capture these logs and try and go through them. And the issue with it, though, is that they're not designed to be used. You're absolutely correct, and there are there are sort of anecdotal bits of information on Apple blogs that say, be careful about using these logs because they could change at any time. They're not something that we're necessarily supporting as a user front end. They're there, as a bit of value, but they're not there to be used, categorically in a particular way. And so what it looks like is happening is there's a lot of different internal subsystems within the device that are all writing their logs like mini applications, and it's kind of asynchronous. They just come out as and when that module has something to say. So what I've had to do is build effectively a state machine, a way that says, using the knowledge of Wi-Fi and how Wi-Fi works, what order do these things make sense in? And then so you collect these logs, and then effectively you're compiling them and saying, well, I've just got a new piece of information about a new BSS ID that the device has seen. Is that because it's connecting to it, or because it's scanning it, or because it's just part of some information in a cache, or what? And so you kind of have to had to do, in fact, a lot of the time, probably the first 6 months of this development was spent just making sure that the ordering of that and the use of that made sense. And in the early prototypes, it was like, oh, I switched to this bit ID. Oh, well, I haven't actually really. I've overlooked the fact that that's just pre-information. So bringing that out was quite a challenge. In the way you get it, there are Apple tools to do it, and there are other ways where you can access the kind of streaming virtual interface that comes out over that. You do need to get trust. So at the moment, you have to connect the iPhone or the iPad to a Mac, establish trust, and then you can see it. But the most recent change and update was that there are ways of capturing the logs locally on the device using key presses or assistive shortcuts. And then it'll save it there for you, and then you can actually access it as a file, share it around and whatever. You have to be a bit careful. I don't run it as a web service, or I don't share these files around because there's personal information in there. And so one of the big key points about what I do is giving people the tool to analyze their own logs in their own space and not share these things around. Firstly, they're huge. They're 300 or 400 megs in size. But secondly, they've got a lot of personal information inside. It's a compliance nightmare to try and move that around. So what we want to do is process those, boil them down to useful Wi-Fi information, and then share that kind of information about the system, nothing else.
So you mentioned a few moments ago where people would say, be careful about using this information, these logs, because it could change at any time on if those logs will continue to come in that format or in that manner or at all. So does it make you nervous? I mean, you've built a product around accessing those logs, processing, analyzing those logs, presenting them to a user in a tool. I mean, that's got to make you nervous if they can change that at any time, right? I mean, or how often are they changing it, and how often do you have to go in and rewrite the code to make it work this new way Apple decides to do something?
Well, first of all, I think therein lies the value, right? So you're really busy. You took a weekend to write a Python script with some time you didn't have, and it was working. And then all of a sudden there's an update, and then your Python script's broken, and you can't. Now you have to kind of like dive back into something you did a year or two ago. So for the individual to track that's actually tricky, and it's difficult. But that's my value. My value is that because I'm looking at these all the time and I can see these changes incrementally from the dot releases, but also through the main releases. So right now, I'm already looking at iOS 17, which is in developer beta. And I get 6 months to make sure that the product works and is back on track. So there have been things that are broken from, not usually within the dot releases, but within the major releases, things break for sure. And I get this 6-month window to get it working again. There is a risk that one day it'll break beyond repair. The product is licensed annually, so the idea is that maybe one day it'll run out, but it doesn't look like that. And despite even there being sort of messages from Apple saying, be careful about using these because you can't guarantee what they'll do, it hasn't gone away. And I'm almost positive it hasn't gone away because it's just too useful to even Apple in the field.
No, that's good. That's good. And you mentioned earlier that you were also working on like an Android version. I'm assuming you meant the Android version of nOversight for that app. Are there any other products, applications that you're working on in addition to this, or is this like this is what your company does?
So my company is Numerous Networks, and nOversight is the product, and it is a product family. And yes, there will one day be an Android product because the same logs are there. And even though Android gives you a ton of information from it, internal APIs, there's more about device logic. So APIs tell you state. but they don't necessarily give you some of the logic for changing state. Whereas the logs, and I'll give you a good example, but the logs will tell you, those events that occurred in order for that state to change. And so getting that on Android is good. But Numerous Networks is a company that I run it, and it's basically a consultancy and a product development company, and doing both. It's almost like what Peter was saying earlier about the 50-50 between training and doing. It's no point in me writing a tool to say, hey, this is going to help solve all of your analysis problems from a client side if I'm not out there doing that. So I am fortunate enough to work in the UK here as an associate to a company called Real Wireless, and Real Wireless have a huge. They are the UK's de facto company for helping wireless stadiums and other large infrastructure providers with their Wi-Fi and wireless in general. So that'll be Wi-Fi, that'll be DAS, that'll be small cells, private 5G, and so on. There's a lot more they do. But in my role with them, I'm able to actually then go into a lot of extremely challenging environments like high density stadiums and tackle problems and get user experience insights and use my tool and develop it more within that environment as well. So to answer your question a little bit, there's the tool, but I also package the tool with a whole service in terms of let me help you understand how you can test user experience, and we can evaluate that user experience and come to an understanding of what is the experience and why it might be faltering at times. So to give an example, a stadium example, right, there's a lot of systems going on. There's a lot of systems in to deliver wireless, right? So you've got an access point, you've got controllers, you've got a NAC for authentication, you've got firewalls, you've got all sorts of routing. So there's an example where in a stadium, captive portal, which is again provided by a third party, couldn't be cleared. And it was specifically hitting iOS devices, and the vendors were kind of looking at things and say, well, I can see it hitting the captive portal provider, and the captive portal provider is clearing this and saying, it's authenticated. This is quite challenging because I'm now having to look across 5 or 6 systems. Well, what we were able to do with client logs is say, well, this is the single point in this network that knows how all of those systems are being transitioned. Now, it won't give you the detail, but it knows at that client's point of view what was happening. And so on the client logs, you could see it hitting the captive portal, and you could see it going through and authenticating and doing everything. But once it had cleared the captive portal and it was trying to go to Apple servers to actually test whether the network was now available and could be actually browse the internet, that was failing. And we were able to use that client information to say, yeah, everything's working, and it's not congestion at the radio level. It's not an RF performance issue because you can clear the captive portal and all those things. It's just this one test that's failing. And it turned out to be various rules around HTTPS and redirections and all those kind of things. But with that information, we knew which of the 6 systems to go and have a look at and say, let's make a change here, and the changes worked. And that was all just sitting remotely. I didn't even have to go to the stadium. People just sent logs and just did it like that.
Yeah, that's my preferred method of troubleshooting, is just from my home office, not having to go on site. Well, that's neat though. I didn't know that you also did your own field work. You go out and do consultant type services to troubleshoot, debug issues. So that's neat. And it's also really neat that you're able to use your own tool that you've developed as you do that debugging and that troubleshooting process. That's a good segue. Now, I want to get more into a discussion, and thanks, Ben, for sharing all of that with us. I actually learned quite a bit more about you than than I had previously known. So thanks for sharing that. Right now, I want to just open this up for more of a discussion between the three of us, with just a little bit of time we have left here. And I'd like to just talk more about like analysis, Wi-Fi analysis in general, right? Um, and before we kind of go into some of the questions I have, I want to understand like what are some of the and Ben, I probably know your answer to this. What are some of the kind of up and coming tools that you guys like to use when you're doing um, when you need to go on site, right, and do some kind of debugging, troubleshooting? What do you guys bring with you? What are you using when you do that? We'll start with you, Peter.
Yeah, good questions. Tools is an interesting thing because there's lots of tools which are useful. I always say probably the two main tools, troubleshooting tools that I would use would be a protocol analyzer and a spectrum analyzer of some sort. I
Like which ones? Like feel free to name drop. The hardware and the software that you like to use.
Yeah, so it varies, and over my career it's varied, but I'm a big fan of OmniPeak, as a lot of people know. It's a great protocol analyzer by Live Action. It previously was Wild Packets. I've used it most of my career, but I'll sometimes use Wireshark as well. So I'm not, because Wireshark obviously is. Obviously, if you're using a Mac, that's a tool you can use on Mac, whereas OmniPeak is Windows-based too. But also, if I want to capture on multiple machines, having a paid tool on multiple devices can be sometimes expensive. So I'll use probably mainly me personally will use a mixture of OmniPeak and Wireshark as a protocol analyzer tool. I've used nearly every spectrum analyzer on the market, and it feels like for doing spectrum analysis, I'm actually I used to, my favorite always used to be the Cognio card, which Cisco brought, and then embedded the chip into their Clara APs. That was a tool I used to keep. For people who don't know the Cognio card, it was a PCAP card. And I used to keep an old laptop just so I could continue to use that card for many, many years. In fact, I still have a laptop I can put it in sometimes, if depending on. But I've used the Sidekick by Ekahau, their built-in spectrum analyzer. That's another great spectrum analyzer. I have just recently been looking at trying to find a really good 6 gigahertz spectrum analyzer. And I've been looking at a number of different ones, and sort of a bit higher end than what we typically use in a wireless Sophia. So when there's RCM and there's Ekahau both do great, but if you want to sort of go more lab-based spectrum analyzer, you can. I've been looking at a couple of different ones, and I've not landed on a favorite yet, but I'm trying a few different ones out now, because I want to really. So a project I'm currently doing myself is I want to really analyze OFDMA and how it splits up the channel and how the scheduling works. And that's very difficult to do, apart from with a spectrum analyzer, to really see how it's allocating the channel. There's difficulties in literally capturing all the packets. So I've been trying to look at the best spectrum analyzer that can give me the real-time sort of resolution I need to really analyze that spectral. How efficient is OFDMA actually? How efficient has it been with a spectrum analyzer? So, many tools, but they would be my top two. But I hesitate a little bit by saying that because, as I say, a lot of times someone phones me up and wants to pay me lots of money to go and troubleshoot it because they've got a detailed problem that needs protocol analysis level troubleshooting. And of course, there's many problems which don't need that level. And therefore, there's plenty of tools which you may use. You can use things like I really like the NetAli tools. The G3 is a great troubleshooting tool for looking at. It can obviously do protocol analysis, but it can test Wi-Fi's. One thing I really like about the G3 is you can connect to a particular BSS. So as opposed to just connecting to an SSID and you'll connect to whichever AP your client chooses, you can actually pick a particular one. And that can be useful because if you've got a misbehaving or misconfigured AP, it might be that you're not, that might be a problem. The problem might be is that you're not connecting to it. But by able to pick at a BSS level, we had that problem in the hospital once where there was one AP that was particularly causing a problem when you happen to connect to it. But sometimes in that spot, you may not have been connected to that AP and everything worked fine. But when you happen to connect this one particular AP,
Right.
you had the problem. And yeah, the NetAli tool was like a great savior there because I could say, oh, look, it only happens when we connect to this BSS. We connect to another one, it's fine. So that gave us the ability to find what was a firmware bug in that case with a particular AP. APs were sometimes, it was a really interesting problem actually. APs were sometimes determining that the medium was busy all the time. So when it does a clear channel assessment, it comes up whether the medium's free or not. It was always saying the medium's free. And we saw that actually in the log file back then. So about looking at logs, the AP logs. But we initially found it by trying to connect to it, and you just couldn't push any traffic when you connected to that AP. And eventually we found it by looking at the logs. It thought that the medium was busy 100% of the time. And that problem actually would move around APs.
That's interesting.
But without a tool, I could say I want to connect to this AP. Is that one working? I want to connect to this one. It was very hard. So I love the NetAli products. They're a great troubleshooting tool as well.
Yeah, that's neat. I recently got that G3 NetAli tool from my employer, and I haven't used it as much as I would like to. So I'm eager to pull that out more and start doing some more debugging with it. How about you, Ben? What are some of your favorite hardware and software tools that you're using when you go out in the field?
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, clearly I am using nOversight a lot because I want to develop it. And so every time I find a problem, it's something I can add in. So that's a given. But I'm also working with a WLAN Pi project. So I almost always use a couple of WLAN Pis on different channels as my capture. And so I'll use Adrian's AirTool to do that for me. It can capture from my iPhone. It can capture from my from WLAN Pis. So in an environment like a stadium, I might go and set up a few WLAN Pis in and around, and just like in the TV stands and so on, and just secure them there. And then I can actually get to them from a back office and just capture packets as and when I want periodically, and so on. So I like doing that from a packet analysis. I mean, I fully agree with Peter, and I did want to say one thing actually. Yes, I advocate for log analysis, but only very much in the sense that it's an additional tool to packet analysis. Nothing would obviously replace packet analysis. It's like where you use the two together is, I think what really can be helpful from the log analysis is it can actually be a pointer as to what's going on. So like, for instance, in the stadium, I see a client saying, I'm going to disassociate because I've gone 10 beacon periods without hearing a beacon, and I've done a probe and got no ACK, so I'm off by. And so I've got a timestamp, and now you go right back into the packet analysis at that point in time and say, well, what was going on at that time? So I think using WLAN Pi is great for packet capture, and then I use Wireshark because I'm a Mac OS user. I've recently had the pleasure of seeing Tonic at work, and I thought it was fantastic. Just helping to see things like high levels of probes or unact packets and all that kind of stuff. Really, really valuable. So that's great. I do think Tonic's good, and I'm currently trying to get it running under Wine for Mac. Can't quite get there, but I'd like to be able to have that working. But I'm going to throw in one other one, which I think is really good, and I think that along the lines of what Peter's trying to do with OFDMA captures. A year ago, for the WLPC Prague, I put this in as a talk. Unfortunately, I couldn't go in the end because I injured myself. But I started investing some time in SDR captures and analysis, because actually it's a hunch, but it's somewhat proven that if you can actually pick up the waveform, if you know what channel you want to be on and you've got a SDR that you know where to put it, and you can pick up the waveform, you have everything you need to iterate that analysis over and over and over. So Peter, from an OFDMA point of view, if I have the waveform and I can see all the AIDs in there, I can then just go in MATLAB and MATLAB tool. I don't know if you've ever used MATLAB toolboxes, but there's a whole toolbox which will decode, Wi-Fi 6 OFDMA, and I can just go in, change the AID, and reanalyze that waveform, and I only need 10 or 30 seconds worth of capture, and I can see every single user's uplink and downlink, and I just need to iterate and to do that. So I personally think SDR-based captures and then offline tools like MATLAB, where there's a huge investment in the toolboxes to do all this for you, is a fantastic way to go.
Yeah,
it sounds like the two of you need to get together and put your heads together for that OFDMA, dive, the deeper dive that you want to get into. Peter, how far away are you guys from each other? Do you guys live like in and around London? Or are you guys close? Or are you guys like distant neighbors?
Well, I'm in the northeast of England, so I'm a little bit away from the south, but it's not too big an island.
Yeah, I mean, we actually did meet yesterday, and I travelled an hour and a half,
awesome.
and he travelled 2.5 hours. And we met in the middle-ish.
Really? What brought you guys together yesterday?
What
brought you guys together yesterday?
Oh, we had dinner with UC, so it was good.
Yeah.
Nice. Very nice. Fun stuff. Was he sharing with you guys his new version of the sidekick that they're going to use?
Not yesterday, no.
No, he was.
I figured I'd try to get some information out of you guys.
Yeah. You can try and get information, but I'm quite good at not saying.
Yeah, no, I think with UC, there's
as
a lot
is
to talk
UC.
about.
UC is very good at not saying things. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
No, I was just saying there's always a lot to talk about, and the conversation meanders. So we didn't do anything particular. Actually, we had dinner and we just put some of the Wi-Fi worlds to rights. So it was good.
Right on. Well, one question I wanted to get your guys' take on. We're seeing a lot today in the Wi-Fi industry about AI, right? AI is like not just Wi-Fi industry; it's kind of a big buzzword right now. But we're seeing it being implemented more in our Wi-Fi industry here with like the missed APs. I think they kind of, from at least my perspective, they kind of brought it into the industry and are doing more and more. And now other vendors have caught on to how AI can be used. And I'm seeing a lot now with like packet captures being like proactively implemented, so that if and when an issue occurs, you actually have some packet capture data around that you didn't have to initially set up yourself. So, are you guys using anything like that? I know, Peter, you train about that, but in your day to day, do you guys ever have to? Are you using any kind of this AI assisted analysis, either on like the infrastructure side, um, or are you seeing similar types of tools on the device side?
Yeah, I think it, obviously, analyzing packet data is it's a skill, and it's a skill that people need to invest in. And if you're not doing it all the time, you're not going to. It's going to be difficult for people to do, and it's the same. I'm sure Ben says when you're analysing log data. If you just get all the logs from an iPhone, you're going to look at it and go, I have no idea what it's telling me. And the more you look at it and the more you understand it, it becomes a skill of making sense of it. So I think in terms of can AI help in sort of looking through that data and coming up with suggestions of what might be wrong, I think yes, it can do. And in one sense, Ben's tool does some of that for you. That's what it does. It takes in all its log data and presents you with some answers. So I think that's there's definitely a part to play in that, both in the sort of protocol analysis and the log analysis. Um, will AI tell me everything? I'm not sure it always will. It's not going to solve every single problem. It can maybe give pointers to it. I'm just trying to remember the questions you asked, but do I use it? Yeah, if I've got a wireless vendor that provides AI insights, of course that's going to be the first place you look if you're trying to solve a problem. I think AI can, even if it's doing a really good job, it's going to get you what. Let's say in 5 years' time, it's really solving lots of problems for us. It's still only going to get maybe 80%, be able to tell me and identify 80% of the problems. The more difficult ones are going to be firmware bugs, because AI learns what's normal and how things should work and what normal issues. So when you get something new, it's going to be much harder for it to detect. So I think it's great, and I'm a big believer in it, and I think it's something that's going to help, and especially help people who haven't got the self-analysis skills. But I also believe that there'll always be a need for people with that low-level analysis skills, for the 20% or the 10% that you can't fix with AI. And I suspect those skills are going to become more and more valuable. Because if you think about it, if the way you have to solve every problem is protocol analysis, you're going to be doing it a lot, and people are going to be really good at it. If AI is fixing most of your problems and you only need to fire one up every once in a blue moon, you're going to lose the skills. And so I think AI will de-skill engineers. I think it will do. And I worry a little bit about that. And you've seen that technology de-skills people. It has done for years. So I'm not saying anything, new here. Years gone by, if your television or your toaster died, people would fix it. You would take it apart with a screwdriver. People would fix components. They don't anymore. If your piece of electronics dies in your house, you throw it away. You buy another one. That's what we're used to doing, because we don't fix things anymore, and we've lost the skills, I think, to fix things. And I do wonder if the same thing's happening a little bit in networking. That we're going to lose the skills. That's the worry, is we're going to lose the skills to fix things. So what do you do when your network doesn't work and the AI tells you it doesn't work? Maybe you've got to rip it out and buy new infrastructure. Could we get to that point? I think we possibly could. So I think it's an interesting conversation.
And I think
Yeah, I
on
think
that,
I look forward to the day where you have like, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
sorry, it's just our time delay. The I think on that, AI is a catch-all, so it consists of various techniques. So machine learning specifically in log analysis has been around for a long time, things like Splunk and so on, and anomaly detection. So the cyber industry has been using machine learning to detect anomalies for a long, long time, and that's pretty mature. There's companies out there like Darktrace and Cisco's Thousand Eyes, and all that kind of stuff, which will do this stuff, right? And it's doing it for a particular industry. The way it tends to have worked is it's about using anomaly detection or pattern detection to surface information which still has to go to an educated user at that point in time. I think what we're seeing now, your chat GPTs and all that kind of stuff, is actually getting AI as the catch-all to do a job, to complete a job for you. So, today it's like, can you write me a piece of code? And using a lot of training, it's providing that connection between some machine learning surface something that's anomalous, now go and determine what could cause those anomalies from a broader spectrum of data, not related from the data you've captured, but from a broader world. And I think that link is now being made, and we'll see that happening. The difficulty is always in what's in the content, and that privacy versus sharing need, which will get in the way of some of this. And I think there's a fine line being trod there already. So I watch that closely to see where that will go.
Yeah. No, when I think about AI, it is really neat that we have these AP vendors, that are building this machine learning AI into their solution, and they're actually helping us get data, helping us understand some of that data, and can even, to an extent, take some action, right, based on what's happening, right, when what that data is pointing out. But it's all from that infrastructure perspective, right? What I think could be really neat, and I know that like Mist, there's an agent that you can put on your devices that'll send some data into Marvis, for example. But I look at Ben, like tools like yours that are gathering all this data from the client side. Where I really see this being helpful is where you've got some kind of AI or machine learning um, program that's taking data from the infrastructure and the client side, and it's analyzing all of that data together to see that full picture. But at the end of the day, you guys are both right. I feel the same. Where even if you've got some great AI and machine learning that's gathering data from client side and infrastructure side, um, it's still not going to be able to just automatically fix problems, right? It's going to help perhaps identify problems, but you still need somebody, an engineer, someone who can take that data and then know what to do, right, to resolve whatever issue has been identified. But yeah, what do you guys think about, like, do you see companies that are really also, like, Ben, for you, like taking the kind of data that you're accessing, that you're looking at with your solution and oversight on the client side? Do you guys see that kind of merging together with the infrastructure side and having that AI from the vendor look at both sides of the data? Do you think that's something that they can do, or is that data just too varied?
100%. Like I've spoken a couple of examples where just using the client data to signpost a region of interest, and whether that be in time or within a subsystem or both, and then being able to then go and blend other data that gives you a deeper look from a different point of view in with that. We do create a 360 view on the problem. It's bound to be worth it. Whether that's AI or not is, I'm sure AI could be applied to it, but we're in a dangerous world of applying AI to everything we don't know how to do yet. it might be the right answer, it might not, but doing that kind of activity is definitely going to be valuable.
And I think you also see that vendors are going down that path. So you've mentioned Todd Juniper with they've got a client for now for Windows, for Mac, for Android, to gather that client data. But you look at Cisco, they've been working with Apple to do integration, so they can get information from Apple devices. They've also I know they've also been doing work with Samsung to get data from Samsung devices, and so there's I think the vendors are trying to get that client data, and there's recognizing the value of it, and it's particularly valuable in Wi-Fi as a technology because it's a client. It's very much a distributed, managed system. It's a client-centric system. The client makes most of the decisions in Wi-Fi, unlike cellular, where it's a network making all the decisions. And therefore, I think getting that client data is the vendors are realizing is really important. So I think you're going to see more of that, a lot more of that coming.
Yeah, I'm hopeful about that. I would like to. I as a someone who you know manages a network or comes in to troubleshoot on occasion. I definitely hope that one day I can get full view into um, what the infrastructure is doing and what the clients are doing, because that's really will help decrease the amount of time um, to do all of that debugging and to see both sides and to really truly find the core issue of what's going on. You need to have that full, been like you said, that 360-degree view um, of whatever the issue might be. One last question. I know we're running really short here on time. I wanted to talk with you guys about, and Peter, you spoke about this a bit in the last WLPC about how WPA3 um, can impact our ability to capture packets, um, do a deep, thorough analysis on what's taking place. Um, I guess a two-part question here, like, you know, do you see us being able to still get access to all of that data um, without jumping through a lot of hoops that make it really difficult? And do you see other iterations of the technology that Wi-Fi relies on that might continue to make things more difficult for us to do our debugging analysis?
Yeah, I think from protocol capture point of view, the passive protocol capture, so using something like a WLAN PI or some sort of external dongle to capture packets is becoming harder and harder to do. From WPA3 is one of the reasons we can't decrypt traffic with WPA3, not even on open networks. So we're going to get to a point where we can only capture the MAC headers. And then technologies like OFDMA, multi-user MIMO, transmit beamforming, these technologies make it very hard to sit in one location and capture everything because packets are being, you know, transmit beamformed to a particular location. And unless you're in that location, you can't capture the data. OFDMA, clients tune into their one resource unit. Well, how can I tune into all resource units? So it's becoming much more difficult, I believe. So where do we go? Well, I've said for a number of years now, I believe the solution is AP packet capture, capturing packets from the AP. Because if I'm capturing from an access point, it can give me the traffic um, before it's decoded it, before it's encrypted it, and then packets that the AP receives, it can give me after it's decrypted it. So it can give me all the unencrypted packets, and therefore the encryption doesn't matter. It also sees everything. The AP sees all traffic. So in OFDMA situation, it knows all the packets it's sending, it knows all the packets it receives. So it's a one true place I can really capture everything. Now, it has a disadvantage of, we've always said we like to troubleshoot from the client's point of view. And I'm not going to be able to get all, but I can get all the packets from the client point of view. So I think AP packet capture from capturing everything is where we need to go. And then maybe, yes, we are then relying from getting the client view of it, looking at client logs. And that's where Ben's tool is going to become invaluable, because I can't do that passive capture next to a client anymore because I can't see everything. So it's going to be a matter of a combination of getting that data to give me the full picture.
Yeah, that's when you spoke about that at the WLPC, I got my wheels turning. Um, and yeah, I think the need for vendors to have some kind of agent running on client devices, I think that's going to just be that need is growing, right? Because as you said, as more and more start using the latest and greatest Wi-Fi, we it's really hard for us to get that client perspective packet captures. So we're gonna have to rely on the vendor to have an agent that can capture the data from the client themselves, or on tools like Ben, like in Oversight, that can give us that client device data. I know a lot of APs these days, have radios dedicated specifically for spectrum analysis. Do you think the day will come where there'll also be a radio dedicated purely for, packet capture analysis, or is there already something on the market that you guys are aware of that has like
Yeah.
a dedicated radio for
So a
PCAP?
number of vendors do have that already. They have they have an extra radio. Juniper call it their scan radio, but it's there purely to, you can connect to it. It's not a radio you can connect to. It's there scanning all channels. It can do packet capture. It's there for the whips, and I think that is becoming quite a lot of vendors are putting radios in for that purpose. From a packet capture point of view, though, it runs the same problem as doing passive packet capture, because that radio is not involved in the client communication. I can't capture everything. I can't decode the packets. So I really do believe packet capture is going to have to come from the client serving radios, because it's the only thing that can see everything in the APs. And we do get that. So there's a number of vendors that already provide that capability. As you say, in WLPC, I think I showed some of the Aruba packet capture and the Juniper packet capture is just two vendors I happened to pick. But the nice thing about that, on the Juniper packet capture, I could get all the traffic decrypted, and I could get it. Same actually with Aruba, I can get it decrypted. But I was effectively capturing the packets before it went to the radio and after the radio received it. So yeah, I think that's definitely going to be the future for where we need to capture.
Yeah. Right. Go ahead, Ben.
Think
Ben, you're muted.
I am, because my dog was barking. I fully agree that the AP packet captures is where it's at. Back to your point about blending client and AP side data and other sources, in fact, in the core network, is going to be important. And the direction of travel we see on the client side is, today you can take an Android device and it will give you all of the beacons with the IEs decoded. So regardless of what the medium encryption was, you get these IEs as a human readable format. So that's perfect. And then couple that with the log information that gives you the logic. You can now say, okay, I can see these beacons and I can see these decisions and I can see some other metadata. It's a part of the puzzle. And then when I couple that with the client, with the AP radio, and as Peter says, the serving radio, you're just going to add more color to the picture. and I see that happening. And it's possible also, as you probably might be aware, on iPhones you can take some packets from an iPhone as well. And we'll take this moment to make a point to the fact that in iOS 17, we've just about started to see a few more bits of information come out. So now RSSI and noise and SNR in the shortcuts, so that you might have followed a blog post on that from Kettle, and I contributed. So I think we're seeing some edging along in terms of what you can get out of client devices. And I can't say this is for sure. This is just a personal opinion here, but I feel like the device manufacturers need to be able to debug in the field, right? So Apple SEs and anybody's Samsung SEs and so on need to be able to debug in the field. There needs to be a way to see what that device is doing to somebody, and if it can be seen by them, I think there's elements of it which will be allowed to be seen by anybody with the right knowledge of how to get in there. Obviously, just not your normal standard user. So it's definitely, I see a direction of travel that will allow us to continue to blend, and with what Peter's saying. And I'll go back to my waveform capture. I think we'll get some additional value out of that if you can do it. It's harder, but there might be additional value. When it comes to MIMO, it's going to give you some extra information there.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you guys. Well, I think we're out of time here. You've probably got things to do this evening here. But I do appreciate you guys taking some time to be with me to do this podcast recording. And it's been great just hearing how you guys have gotten into Wi-Fi, what you've been working on, what some of what your journey's been. Hopefully, others who will listen will enjoy learning more about the two of you. You also kind of whet my appetite a bit, saying that the both of you, the two of you, met with UC yesterday. I'm really curious about seeing what comes of that those kinds of interactions. I know that he's got some cool things in the works, and the fact that you three and others are getting together to discuss those things, it's exciting. So I'm very eager to hear more about that in the coming months. But yeah, so thanks again for joining me today. I really appreciate it.